So, you think your job sucks. At least you can say it doesn't end with your body in a sewer, your soul in question, or your hands soaked in blood. In the Middle Ages, work wasn't just hard. It was cursed. These were real jobs, with horrifying consequences. Here are 12 cursed medieval professions you would never survive. Let's start at the bottom. Literally. Every night, these poor souls climbed down into medieval cesspits and shoveled raw sewage out by hand. Gong farmers worked under the cover of darkness, armed with nothing but wooden buckets and long-handled shovels. The pay was surprisingly high, but so were the risks. Methane gas could suffocate you. One slip into the pit, and you'd drown in human waste. Diseases like cholera and dysentery weren't just possible, they were expected. And social status, forget it. You were feared, avoided, and probably smelled like a walking apocalypse. And if you thought filth was bad, wait until death knocks. They wore bird masks, stuffed with herbs to filter out the bad air, believing it would keep the Black Death at bay. It didn't. These doctors weren't well-trained physicians. Often, they were desperate men or failed academics. They wandered plague-stricken streets, surrounded by the dying, tasked with lancing boils, prescribing useless remedies, and sometimes documenting body counts. The worst part? Everyone knew they were doomed. They were walking corpses with a paycheck. But not all medical jobs had masks. Some just had blood. Medieval medicine was obsessed with balancing the four humours, and leeches were the go-to cure for just about everything. That meant someone had to collect them, usually barefoot women or children, who waded into leech-infested swamps and let the creatures latch on. After hours of standing in the water, they'd pry them off and toss them in jars. Repeated bites caused anemia, infections, and permanent scarring. You didn't just lose blood, you lost health, sanity, and probably toes. Powerful? Maybe. Cursed? Definitely. Feared and hated in equal measure, the executioner was society's necessary evil. They decapitated criminals, burned heretics, and broke bodies on the wheel. But miss a swing, fumble a beheading, you were publicly humiliated, or worse. And while people depended on your justice, they also believed your soul was cursed. Many executioners were forced to live outside city walls, barred from churches, and even refused burial in sacred ground. Power came with a price: eternal damnation. Some people work nights. These guys worked with the dead. In the name of science, bodies were needed for dissection, but laws prohibited the use of cadavers, so universities and surgeons hired grave robbers to dig them up. These men worked at night, desecrating graves, always one step ahead of the torch-wielding mobs. Caught, you could be executed. Superstitions ran deep, and many believed that disturbing a grave would unleash the spirit. So if the law didn't get you, something else might follow you home. If you hate pests, this job hated you right back. Rats weren't just pests, they were the messengers of death. In towns overrun by plague, rat catchers were hired to stop the spread. Armed with sticks, dogs, and primitive traps, they stalked alleyways and sewers. Sometimes they'd smoke out whole nests and face hundreds of panicked rodents at once. If the fleas didn't infect you, the rats would bite you. And if none of that got you, the townspeople might blame you when the plague kept spreading anyway. Modern treadmills burn calories. Medieval ones crushed bones. Imagine walking endlessly on a giant wooden wheel, like a human hamster, just to power a winch or grind grain. Prisoners and the poor were forced into this medieval hellscape of labour. The gears were massive and accidents were fatal. If you slipped, you'd be crushed. If you collapsed from exhaustion, you'd be whipped. There were no brakes, no mercy, just the wheel and the sound of your own bones grinding. Ever been punished for something your friend did? Now imagine that, daily. Royalty couldn't be punished. So when the young prince misbehaved, someone else took the beating, his best friend, the whipping boy. The job required total obedience and emotional strength. You had to smile, eat, study, and play with the kid who got you flogged for skipping Latin. You couldn't complain, you couldn't leave. And worst of all, you still had to pretend it was an honor. Think your job is repetitive? There was no shortage of work for medieval gravediggers. Plague, famine, and endless wars kept cemeteries packed. You dug through frozen ground, thick mud and bones from older graves. Sometimes you'd bury dozens in one pit, and when those filled up, you'd have to dig them back up and rebury the remains elsewhere. It wasn't just physical hell, it was psychological. Every night you came home from the dead, but never really left them behind. If you thought working retail was humiliating, try stomping in pee. To clean and strengthen wool, fullers used stale human urine, known as lant. They stomped it with bare feet in massive vats, soaking in the ammonia-rich stench for hours. Their skin would crack, their lungs would burn, and their reputation was worse than a gong farmer's. You couldn't hide it either. The smell was permanent, and society made sure you knew it. Want to be the reason grandma gets into heaven? When someone died, their family would place bread or salt on the body, hoping it would absorb the sins of the deceased. Then they'd pay a sin eater to consume it. In doing so, the eater took on the dead's spiritual corruption. They were believed to carry the weight of dozens, sometimes hundreds of souls. No one wanted to touch them. No one wanted to speak their name. It was isolation for life. And finally, the medieval version of FedEx, with a 50% mortality rate. You rode alone day and night, through war-torn territory. Roads were unsafe. Forests hid enemies. Towns didn't trust strangers. If you were caught, tortured. If your horse fell, stranded. If you lost the message, dead. These weren't just couriers. They were disposable lifelines between kingdoms. And no one remembered their names. So, after hearing about these awful jobs, do you still want to complain about your 9-to-5? These weren't just curse jobs. They were death sentences. Don't forget to subscribe and like the video for more grim tales in medieval history's darkest corners.